Number 8. Scuffed shoes. In April 2019, a German bouncer was considered the main subject in the murder of his wealthy British girlfriend. 33-year-old Mark Schutzler once made a living as a bouncer, but when he met the 22-year-old British heiress Anna Reid in Thailand, his financial worries disappeared. Anna had just gotten an around-the-world ticket from her father, Clive, for her 21st birthday present. She'd also inherited a large sum of money after her mother's death. With this, she had all the means to treat Mark right, and that's exactly what she did, as she spent over £50,000 on him in just a few months, paying for lavish hotels, restaurants, and clothes. His life clearly got a massive upgrade after meeting her. He wasn't the man he appeared to be, though. Apparently, not only was he thousands in debt, but he was also unemployed. When her friends caught a whiff of what was going on, they told Anna he was taking advantage of her wealth. While she didn't want to believe them at first, his constant nagging about wanting more money unraveled things pretty quick. Fast forward to April, a few months after they'd met, and Mark was rushing downstairs to their hotel lobby, saying Anna had passed out. Of course, when the paramedics found her in the bathroom, she was already long dead. He claims that she died accidentally while they were having sex and that she asked him to choke her with a towel. But he was obviously not distressed, as someone who just lost their lover should have been. Instead, he even asked investigators to not scuff his expensive shoes while searching the apartment. Not to mention, he'd also hid her credit card so he could use it later. Eventually, Mark's attempts to cover his tracks were revealed, and he was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with the judge on his case calling him a liar and a very dangerous man. Number 7. Ice cold. In 2006, a grad student in New York was bar hopping with some friends to celebrate her upcoming birthday. By the next morning, she was dead. 24-year-old Emmett St. Gillen was a criminology student at John Jay College. When she went out for a night of drinking and fun, she certainly didn't think it'd end the way it did. During the early hours of February 25, 2006, police got reports of a dead body found in the Brooklyn area. When they arrived, they found Emmett's remains. It was one of the most disturbing murder cases they'd ever recorded. Not only had she been sexually assaulted, but her hands and feet were bound together tightly with zip ties. The case sent police down a rabbit hole of leads that ultimately went nowhere. They asked taxi drivers, barmen, and literally everyone around the area, yet every single suspect was a dead end. Apparently, she decided to stay out longer after her friends had gone home, at which point she was probably wildly drunk. What's more, even the bar's bouncer said he didn't recognize her. Well, at least until they questioned the bar manager, who told the police that he'd asked his bouncer, Daryl Littlejohn, to escort her out after the last call the night of the murder. Now that his lie had been uncovered, Littlejohn did somehow magically remember her, saying her newspaper photograph jogged his memory, though he still insisted that he went the other way after helping her walk out. The investigation, though, concluded otherwise. A small speck of blood found on Emmett's body matched the bouncer's DNA, and they matched some fiber to him as well. The craziest part, Shannon Woodard, a student who was following the case, saw Littlejohn's van and told police he pretended to be law enforcement and tried to kidnap her back in October 2005. Littlejohn's predatory days were finally over, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in July 2009. Number 6. The Veteran. In March 2002, Boston police got a call that someone had been stabbed near a bar. When they got to the scene, they found an ex-Marine suffering from some life-threatening injuries. 23-year-old Daniel Martinez had just finished 4 years of active duty service as a U.S. Marine in 2021 and was finally home to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with his buddies. But what was supposed to be a fun day out turned into a nightmare. He and a friend headed to the Sons of Boston Bar and Grill. For some reason, though, they were denied entry. After exchanging a few words with the bouncer, some of which were likely said in the heat of the moment, the duo turned back and started walking in the other direction. Little did they know they'd awaken a monster. The 38-year-old bouncer, Alvaro Larama, was pursuing them with what looked like to be some kind of object in his hand. Daniel was aware of this and even turned to block Larama's incoming attack. At least that's what he thought he was doing. But the bouncer outsmarted him and struck him on the head with an aluminum beer bottle instead. Alvaro then proceeded to stab Daniel 2 times in the chest before escaping back to the bar, changing his clothes and leaving out the back. And even though Daniel was rushed to the hospital, he didn't quite make it in time. Now, no one really knew Alvaro's true motive. He ended up surrendering himself to the police without much struggle. Having said that, he was charged with murder and will probably spend most of his life behind bars. Number 5. Angry Marine. In April 2021, a US Marine was thrown out of a nightclub for breaking the rules, but instead of accepting his mistake and moving on, he decided to duke it out with a bouncer who was much larger than him. In what could only be described as a David versus Goliath type situation, the US Marine, Glenn Thomason, was adamant about going back into the Monsoons club. Apparently, after being thrown out, he started yelling insults at the 34-year-old bouncer Hayden Summers. Not to mention, he looked as if he was ready to throw hands. In fact, at one point during the interaction, he said, "I could kill you. I'm a trained killer. I'm a US Marine." The minute he tried taking a swing at the bouncer, though, he received the hardest punch of his life. And while Hayden only called it a 6 out of 10 strike, it knocked him out on the spot. Not to mention, the punch was so brutal that Thomason was forced to have part of his skull removed and spend a long time in the hospital. Of course, Hayden was arrested and found guilty of unlawfully causing serious harm. The bouncer argued that he only acted out of self-defense, though. What do you think? If someone made hand gestures at you and told you they could kill you, would that be enough of a threat to fight? Let us know in the comments below. Number 4. Wartime pleasures. What would you do if someone told you the world was going to end? Well, one bouncer in war-ridden Crimea thought it would be a good idea to relieve some stress and have sex in front of people. Just 12 hours before a series of explosions were reported nearby at the Saki Air Base, the 32-year-old bouncer was making a few explosions of his own in the bar he worked at. Apparently, things got too rowdy with a nightclub visitor, and he invited her to the top of the bar's counter to strip. One thing led to another, and well, there you have it. They had sex on the center stage while everyone cheered them on and recorded. Not to mention, some very devious customers got very close to the shirtless guard and the brunette. But as she held to the ceiling grate to keep her balance, they went at it for a while too. Public sex is a punishable crime in Russia and can land you 15 days in jail. So as soon as the raunchy video made its way to social media, the police immediately searched for the kinky culprits. Even though the bouncer was caught and put in administrative detention for a few weeks, the female participant remains at large to this very day. Number 3. Overly intoxicated. It's pretty common for bouncers to escort drunk patrons out of bars after hours. In April 2022, though, one Philadelphia bouncer took things too far. 24-year-old Kenneth Fry worked for a private security firm and was appointed at the Taboo Lounge in Sports and City Center. Of course, he'd encountered his fair share of drunk customers during his time. But a 41-year-old patron, Eric Pope, perhaps rubbed him after pushing him out of a property at around 1 a.m. for being overly intoxicated. He then proceeds to punch him. This obviously knocked Eric to the ground, where he laid unconscious for a minute or so before other bouncers moved him from the sidewalk. This was deliberately something wrong though, since Eric didn't even put up a fight after some time passed. Guess what? A few moments later, a crowd formed around him and he was taken to the hospital. The next week, he was pronounced dead. Yep, Kenneth murdered the guy and went on the run from the police. Well, at least for a day. He ended up turning himself in after officials issued a warrant for his arrest. And without any complication, Kenneth Fry was soon charged with third-degree murder. Number 2. No witnesses. In August 2022, a bouncer in Suffolk thought it would be a good idea to cover up the bar's camera before beating a customer. Little did he know, though, that there was another camera recording everything. 31-year-old David Cruz worked as a bouncer at the Tailgaters bar in Holbrook, and while being aggressive came with a job description, he hadn't really done anything too extreme, at least not until 3 a.m. on August 21, when he got into a heated argument with one 32-year-old customer named Jake Scott. In fact, things went south so quickly that Cruz was ready to throw hands, and that's exactly what he did, but not without some precaution. He took off his shirt and threw it at the bar's camera to obscure its view. When that failed, he got up on a chair and covered it properly himself. What he didn't know, though, was that there was another security camera nearby capturing the fight. Regardless, thinking how he was in the clear, Cruz now let his demons take control. As a 6'5" man weighing 270 pounds, his fists packed a hefty punch. There's a reason why he was a bouncer after all. He started wailing on Scott, punching him repeatedly in the head and knocking him out cold. When the poor customer was on the ground motionless, Cruz grabbed him by the shirt and ordered him to get up. When Scott obviously didn't respond, the bouncer delivered a final blow to his head for good measure before leaving the crime scene. The victim was rushed to the hospital in the morning where he was put in a medically induced coma. Sadly, he'd suffer a brain bleed, a skull fracture, and a traumatic brain injury, all of which led to his death 1 week later. Cruz, on the other hand, surrendered a day after the attack and was indicted for a first-degree manslaughter charge. Number 1. Leave the neck alone. In November 2017, an English bouncer took things too far while escorting a customer out of a nightclub in a chokehold. 25-year-old Karen Spencer was a bouncer at a Bijou nightclub in Bingley, West Yorkshire, and had a tendency to be very brazen at his job sometimes. On a cold November night, though, he turned his aggression up to 11 when he was asked to escort a 24-year-old patron named James Etherington out of the club. He grabbed him by the throat and carried him outside. His basic training handbook literally said, "Whatever you do, leave the neck alone." Still, he held James at a chokehold and walked out as the poor man struggled to breathe. Not to mention, by the time he got outside, the customer was already in a cloudy state of consciousness. Here's the brutal part. Instead of putting him down or shoving him away, Spencer flung him straight at the pavement. Of course, James landed on his head and suffered a traumatic brain injury, which was so bad that he died in a hospital after 10 days. Even though Spencer denied all of the murder charges, he was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Still, in spite of the fact that the judge tried to make him fully understand that he was indeed a murderer, saying he was the only one responsible for an innocent man's death, not an ounce of remorse was seen behind Spencer's eyes. Thanks for watching. If you were a bouncer at a bar and a customer was hurling threats at you, would you use force to push them away? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on Bad Badger.